Welcome back to the Wisdom Within. I'm Lara Jaye, and I've been thinking a lot this week about a conversation I had over coffee with a client. Actually, that's not entirely true. It wasn't just one conversation. It seemed as though every person who sat across from me over the last several days was describing the same experience, only using different words. One woman told me she couldn't understand why she no longer cared about things she used to enjoy. Another said she felt emotionally flat, almost as though someone had turned the volume down on her life. Someone else described feeling exhausted, even though she had finally started sleeping better. And another woman quietly looked at me and said, "Lara, I just feel heavy." That word stayed with me, not because it's unusual. In fact, I hear it all the time, but because I started wondering what people are actually trying to describe when they say heavy. Not because it's unusual, quite the opposite. Like I said, I hear it all the time. Heavy. It's an interesting word because it isn't really an emotion. We don't wake up and think, today I feel heavy. Well, maybe some of us, the way we might say we feel happy, angry, or disappointed. It's usually the closest word people can find when they know something doesn't feel right, but they don't yet have language for what they're experiencing. And I've come to believe that's part of the problem. Sometimes the greatest source of suffering isn't the emotion itself, it's not having words for it. I've watched this happen hundreds of times over the years. Someone begins telling me about their life, and as they're talking, I notice a pattern they haven't quite seen yet. I simply reflect it back to them. I don't change their circumstances, and I don't magically solve the problem. I am able to put words around something they've been living for years. Almost every time, they become very quiet. And then they say some version of the same thing. That's exactly it. Or, I've never thought about it that way. Or my favorite, I've been trying to explain that for years. Those moments never get old for me. Not because I've figured out something that they didn't. It's because I can almost feel their nervous system relax. Their life hasn't changed in the last 60 seconds. Their marriage is still their marriage. Their children are still their children. The uncertainty they're carrying, it's still there. But something inside them settles because for the first time, what they've been experiencing finally makes sense. I wonder if clarity is one of those most overlooked forms of healing. I don't know that we talk enough about clarity. We talk about peace and joy and confidence and purpose and healing. But I wonder if clarity quietly sits underneath all of them. When we finally understand what we've been experiencing, the nervous system no longer has to keep searching for an explanation. Confusion itself is exhausting. Sometimes simply making sense of our experience creates space for the body to exhale. I think that's why people leave a session saying they feel lighter. It's rarely because we've solved everything in an hour. Life is usually still waiting for them when they walk out the door. But they finally understand themselves, and sometimes that alone removes a weight they didn't even realize that they were carrying. We spend so much of our lives trying to get rid of uncomfortable feelings that we rarely stop to ask whether those feelings are trying to tell us something. We assume that if we feel anxious or discouraged, restless, or heavy, something must be wrong. So naturally, we try to fix it. We distract ourselves. We become busier. We tell ourselves we should be more grateful. We convince ourselves we just need a vacation, a new job, a better morning routine, or more discipline. What if instead it was asking to be understood? That question has stayed with me now for almost 30 years. I remember sitting in the waiting room of a therapist's office when I was in my early 30s. There was a book sitting on the table. I never opened it. In fact, I don't even remember the author. but I've never forgotten the title. And it was something like, "What is your depression trying to tell you?" At the time, I thought that was the strangest idea. Why would depression have something to teach me? I didn't want to learn from it. I wanted it to leave. But over the years, I found myself returning to that title again and again. Not because I struggled with depression throughout my life, because I did, but because it introduced me to a question that quietly changed the way I look at almost everything in my life. What if our bodies are not actually betraying us? It happened to me even recently. My body wasn't betraying me. It was continuing a conversation that I had postponed. That realization changed the way I experienced my grief. Instead of judging myself for falling apart a day late, I found myself feeling grateful that my body trusted me enough to bring it back when I finally had the space to listen. Just recently, I spent most of Father's Day doing what so many of us do when something inside of us feels too tender to touch. I kept myself moving, worked with clients, went to yoga, did my weights, and eventually drove to watch the sunset. None of those things were inherently wrong. In fact, they were all things I genuinely enjoy. But underneath each one was a quiet attempt to stay just busy enough that I didn't have to sit with the grief that had been waiting for me all day long. Anything but feeling what was quietly pinging at me, that was waiting underneath to get my attention. The next morning, before my feet had even touched the floor, the tears were there. And along with them came a sadness and a grief I quietly postponed the day before. Now, nothing new had happened overnight. My body had simply decided that I was finally still enough to continue the conversation. That's the thing about emotions. What we avoid doesn't disappear. It simply waits for our presence. My dad passed away suddenly in 2020. I never got the chance to say goodbye. He wasn't the kind of father who told me he loved me or reminded me how proud he was. His way of loving was through advice and concern and telling me what he thought I should do. And for years, I interpreted his way of loving as criticism. I told myself it meant he didn't believe in me, that somehow I wasn't enough and never would be. I see something completely different now. I see a man who loved his daughter deeply and was trying to help in the only way he knew how. And the last time I saw him in person, we argued. I don't remember what we were arguing about. What I do remember is walking away feeling like no matter what I accomplished, it would never be enough. I don't think the other morning was really about Father's Day at all. I think it was about what happens when we postpone a conversation with ourselves. I had managed to keep moving the day before, keep myself distracted enough to believe I was fine, but my body knew that there was still something waiting to be felt. I'm grateful it didn't let me keep avoiding it, because that experience reminded me of something I witness with clients all the time. Our bodies aren't trying to make life more difficult. They're trying to bring us back into an honest conversation with ourselves, in harmony, in alignment with our own beliefs and emotions. What if our body is actually wanting to become more honest with us than we've been willing to be? When I sit with clients now, that's generally where we begin. We don't start by trying to make the anxiety disappear or convince the sadness to leave. Instead, I'll simply ask, where do you notice it in your body today? Maybe a tightness in their chest, a knot in their stomach, something in their throat. The location changes, but the conversation usually doesn't. And then after we sit with it for a moment, I'll ask another question. If that part of your body could speak, what do you think it would want you to know? It's remarkable to me how often people already know the answer, not because I gave it to them, because their body has been trying to tell them all along. One thing I've noticed over the years is our bodies are remarkably patient with us. They rarely begin by shouting. More often they whisper, quietly trying to get our attention long before they ever need to raise their voice. Sometimes it's a quiet feeling that something is off, even though you can't explain why. or it's a loss of enthusiasm for things that you used to enjoy. And sometimes it's waking up in the morning already feeling tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because you've been carrying something for so long that it has quietly become part of the landscape of your life. That's what fascinates me. Human beings have an incredible capacity to adapt. We adapt to difficult relationships, to stress, to grief, over responsibility. Eventually, we become so accustomed to carrying the weight that we stop noticing we're carrying it at all, until one day we do. I remember a woman who came to me several years ago. She sat down and almost immediately said, "I've lost my purpose." As we began talking, I noticed she kept describing herself as unmotivated. She wasn't excited about work anymore. She didn't feel connected to the people around her or even her hobbies that she at one time just loved. She was convinced something inside of her was broken. But as we slowly walked through the previous 10 years of her life, a very different picture began to emerge. During that decade, she had lost both of her parents. Her marriage had quietly unraveled. One of her kids had gone through a significant health crisis. She had become the emotional anchor for pretty much everyone around her. She was the one people called when something went wrong, the dependable one, the capable one, the woman who always figured things out. When was the last time someone asked how you were doing and stayed long enough to hear the answer? She looked at me for a minute and, almost embarrassed, said, "I honestly don't remember." Her answer told me far more than anything else we had talked about that afternoon. She hadn't lost her purpose. Somewhere along the way, she had simply lost herself beneath years of carrying everyone else's pain. And those are two very different experiences. I've found that many people become frightened when they begin feeling emotionally heavy because they assume it means they're moving backwards. They worry they're becoming depressed, losing their edge, maybe even feel like a failure. I see it differently, though. Sometimes that heaviness isn't evidence that you're falling apart. It's simply evidence that the part of you that's been holding everything and everyone together is finally becoming tired. And there's wisdom in that, not because exhaustion is something we should celebrate, but because our bodies are sometimes far wiser than we give them credit for. They know when we've been living beyond our emotional capacity long before our minds are willing to admit it. I wonder if one of the greatest misunderstandings in our culture is the belief that functioning well means we're doing well. Those two things are not the same. I've sat with people who were building successful businesses, leading organizations, raising families, volunteering, caring for parents, showing up for everybody around them and quietly wondering why they no longer felt connected to their own lives. Nothing looked wrong from the outside. Many of us become so identified with being the responsible one that we don't even notice when we're no longer asking ourselves the very simple question, what do I need? Not what everybody else needs, not what's next on the calendar, not what's expected of me. What do I need? It's such a simple question, yet for many people it's surprisingly difficult to answer. Not because they don't have needs, because they've become so practiced at listening outward that they've slowly lost the habit of listening inward. I think that's one of the quiet tragedies of adulthood. Not that life becomes busy, of course it does. It's that over time we become fluent in everyone else's emotional world while forgetting our own. And then one day, our body begins speaking on our behalf. Not because it's trying to punish us, not because we failed, but because it loves us enough to say we can't keep living this far away from ourselves anymore. Perhaps this week, instead of asking yourself how to stop feeling heavy, ask what the heaviness has been patiently trying to tell you. Tune into your body. You may discover that your body isn't asking you to become someone new. It might simply be asking you to come home to someone you've missed for a very long time. I've stopped being afraid of heaviness. I don't enjoy it any more than anyone else, and I certainly don't go looking for it. But I also don't assume anymore that it's something to get rid of as quickly as possible. It's become one of the most honest conversations I can have with myself. It tells me when I've been carrying too much. It tells me when I've drifted too far away from what nourishes me. It reminds me that there's grief, disappointment, or exhaustion that I've been trying to outrun. Whatever it's saying, I've learned that it's usually speaking for a part of me that has been patiently waiting to be heard. If you notice that familiar heaviness showing up, perhaps you don't have to rush to fix it this time. You can simply be curious. Sit with it for a few moments, breathe. Ask what it has been patiently trying to tell you. You may discover that your body has never been working against you. It was trying to lead you back to yourself all along. I don't think our bodies betray us. I think they love us enough to become increasingly honest until we're finally willing to listen. And perhaps that is the invitation this week, not to figure everything out, not to force yourself to feel better, just to become a little more curious. If that heaviness shows up again, instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? Maybe ask, what have you been patiently trying to tell me? As we move into today's light language transmission, I invite you to simply receive. There's nothing you need to do or figure out. Only be present with whatever unfolds. My intention is to support your system in creating space for what's ready to emerge. And as your body and energy naturally release what they no longer need to carry, they also become more available to receive what will best support you now. Nature is always moving toward balance and renewal. As space opens, it can be gently filled with greater clarity, deeper trust, peace, and vitality, or whatever your highest wisdom knows is most needed at this time. So today we're going to gently release the emotional weight your body has been carrying that no longer belongs to you, while strengthening your trust in your own inner wisdom and your body's remarkable ability to guide you back to yourself. Take a deep breath in with me. Hold. Blow out. Do that one more time. Le tonda le de la ala corande de yende yoko elamayoto de le caleandiaca. Galian bogando le clecadi and the ingaletiinga calekianga corabioto da puon. Kyoto zebiondo la clecadi and the inga calekia yo pareti gela de la beanga corekianga calekiang. Yingo. Giondo de biotora la caleani car calecadiende di calecadiende di kayakan calekianga cariandaringa carenderinga coriemboko otondara cariandara la carin o ara eka yetteriende di calecadiende di ka carenderi ka caretiaka coma kioso qua kiota la caliata kiopocariata kiota la ka Kiel dare la cariandari kale kale ka. La shakwane kola boam, kiotore shwam. Galotore kale cariandari anda, kore biotong, corendari di clicarianda kaleaka. Kyoto, kiosqua. Take a deep breath in. Out. Rest of your week.